undercurrent for all this. I've heard talk, including in Congress, that Secretary Dizon and his team have connections with Dpwh contractors, and that certain members of Secretary Dizon's teams are, in fact, contractors. I heard that Secretary Dizon and his team have connections with contractors, and in the interest of transparency, should disclose all of their connections with contractors and any knowledge that they have on the possibility of kickbacks from Dpwh projects. I was approached by people saying that contractors were in talks with Dpwh to download or magpababa ng mga proyekto sa distrito ko. I have also heard that many of the projects being implemented from the 2025 budget in my district were also inserted this way. Again, not through congressional insertions, but mga ipinasok ni Regional Director, ni USEC, baka mga kaibigan ni Secretary. This, I think the public should know, is how the Dpwh budget, at least in my district, was written. Based on what I was told, may mga contractor na may mga kakilala daw sa Dpwh na nagpapasok ng mga projects. At again, weaving it together with the Senate testimonies, meron konsiderasyon. Kaya ipinapasok mga ito ng Dpwh at ang mga contractor na yon ang nakakakuha ng mga kontratang ito. Nandito po ako dahil trabaho ko na gawin ang lahat para sa aking distrito, tulad ng ibang mga kongresista. At marami po akong nakikitang mga dapat na reforma sa ating sistema. At bilang isang congressman, layunin ko na makakuha ang aking distrito ng fair share ng budget at ang ibang mga distrito ay dapat mabigyan din ng fair share. At pangalawa, gusto ko lang din naman ibaba ang presyo ng Dpwh projects. Sinabi ko po ng 25% para maiwasan ang posibleng 150 billion pesos ng kickbacks. Kaya anuman ang susunod kong sasabihin ay nasa konteksto na may solusyon naman. At sinasabi ko po ito para sana tumulong si Dpwh Secretary Vince Dizon sa mga solusyon na ito. My first point today is that contractors are part of writing the Dpwh budget and allegedly pay Dpwh officials for budgetary allocations from the non-allocable or so-called leadership fund that is prepared by the Dpwh. And as I will say more about later, I heard that Secretary Dizon and his team have connections with contractors, and in the interest of transparency, should disclose all of their connections with contractors and any knowledge that they have on the possibility of kickbacks from Dpwh projects. So that is the main point that I would like to bring up today that I will say more about later, that I am asking Secretary Vince Dizon to disclose any and all of his and his team's connections with current, past, or potential future contractors of Dpwh projects. Because of the scrutiny on insertions in Congress and Senate, insertions have now moved to the National Expenditure Program that is supposedly prepared by only the Dpwh. And according to flood control hearings, contractors submit lists of projects to Dpwh, and payments are made as early as when they appear in the NEP, on the presumption that the district engineering offices will award the contracts to the contractors that pay for the projects to be inserted by the Dpwh officials into the NEP. When Dpwh was writing the 2026 NEP, my staff received Viber messages that I can ask that we share on the screen from my former district engineer. The Viber messages read, ito po yung isang 1B na for funding. Hiningi po ng isang contractor na tutulong magpa-release ng funds. Above is the list of proposed projects worth 600 million for a certain contractor. Yan ma'am ay dadalhin sa inyo at siya daw ang mag-aasikaso. Ito nga pala, dati na ding may nag-aasikaso ng pondo pero wala pa namang bumabalik sa amin na letter kung denied or hindi. Contractor sa regional office ang nag-request niyan dati ma'am, last year pa. And what we found out when the NEP came was one of the non-allocable projects of Dpwh in my district. Perhaps kasama ito sa leadership funds na binanggit ni former Secretary Bonoan sa Senate Blue Ribbon Committee hearing. The point being that if this was how the NEP was written in my district, na bago lumabas ang NEP, pinakita sa akin ng isang DPWH official na ito ay ipapasok ng contractor at yan ay lumabas at nakatag as non-allocable, meaning hindi po ito proposed ng congressman. Ito po ay hindi nga magagalaw, kaya nga non-allocable ang tawag ng congressman. Ito po ay ipinasok ng DPWH na may pruweba tayo na galing sa contractor, baka sa ibang distrito, ang mga contractors ay may mga insertions din sa 2026 budget, which if we tie it together with the testimonies in the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee hearings na sabi daw nagkakaroon ng mga kickbacks paglabas pa lang ng NEP, it could well have been that there have already been projects that have been paid for in the 2026 NEP. And you could surmise there would be even more in other districts because the contractors, of course, don't have history dealing with me and would tend to put their projects in a district that the congressman will not interfere in rigging their bids in favor of them. And while I was newly elected, I was approached by people saying that contractors were in talks with DPWH to download or magpababa ng mga proyekto sa distrito ko. I have also heard that many of the projects being implemented from the 2025 budget in my district were also inserted this way, again, not through congressional insertions, but mga ipinasok ni Regional Director, ni USEC, baka mga kaibigan ni Secretary. This, I think the public should know, is how the DPWH budget, at least in my district, was written. Based on what I was told, may mga contractor na may mga kakilala daw sa DPWH na nagpapasok ng mga projects. At again, weaving it together with the Senate testimonies, meron konsiderasyon. Kaya ipinapasok mga ito ng DPWH at ang mga contractor na yon ang nakakakuha ng mga kontratang ito. And that it's the officials in DPWH who have been reportedly engaging in these transactions. And that the consequence from a policy standpoint is because my district will not allow rigging of bids, then this portion of the budget, which is non-allocable, which the DPWH can put in districts of their choosing, will not be put in districts like mine, where there is no rigging of bids. And so, the tendency would be for these projects to be parked in the districts where they have the highest confidence that they can earn the most if their objective, which they can disprove, and we would be glad if they could disprove, is to earn from these projects. So this happened in the 2026 NEP that was submitted in July, in the time of Secretary Bonoan. And Secretary Dizon submitted a revised NEP in September of 2025 for 2026. And last Friday, the media asked him what changes he plans to make about the 2026 budget. And if it is safe to say that the 2026 budget is not yet stripped from insertions and leadership funds, and Secretary Dizon said, "My problem with the 2026 budget is it's no longer in our hands." And to be quite frank, I had zero part in that budget at all. I came in, it was already submitted, I was given a week to review it to submit a new budget. For 2027 moving forward, we're definitely going to review all these processes, all these formula, because these cannot continue. And I'm hoping that Secretary Dizon will use the time available to revise the 2026 budget, particularly the projects that can be traced to the non-allocable leadership funds, that he knows what they are because those files are available in DPWH because of the evidence that there has been some undesirable process for how projects were inserted into the DPWH budget with the input of interested contractors. So we have established that contractors insert projects into the DPWH NEP, and the question then is why? What motive would someone have not to touch these projects? I would add further that Secretary Dizon also added many new projects in the NEP, replacing some projects from Secretary Bonoan, and that information on these projects were committed to be shared in congressional budget hearings, but these have not yet been shared. Secretary Dizon said that as I will show in a video later, these projects would be disclosed. But if I can share the...
We will give you the copies, Madam Chair, no, of this. No, I don't have them off the bat right now, but we will provide the details to the Honorable Committee po. Yes, I think that will be readily available naman po. Just to make it very clear, breakdown per legislative district for the 2024 General Appropriations Act, the 2025 General Appropriations Act, and the current submission for the 2026 National Expenditure Program per legislative district. We will comply, Madam Chair. According to our staff po, wala po.
So, first, there were requests by members of Congress for certain budgets to be disclosed. What the past budgets of Secretary Bonoan were, and what the new budget, including that proposed by Secretary Dizon, were. And these are actually derivable from the publicly available data. But for some reason, even after these are publicly committed that they would be shared, they have not yet been shared, and would be very important actually for members of Congress to see if the budget was equitably distributed, and if there is a large allocation in some places, and if we can also see the data on if those are non-allocable and who is the proponent of those non-allocable projects, then the public could help in scrutinizing if there is some potential interest by some parties for certain projects. And I actually have here the data that was requested by some members of Congress. And again, they have this data. They have given me this data before. Others can also derive this data, and others can also derive it without needing any special processing. So it's curious why they're not sharing at least the data on the budget per legislative district. I believe the Senate budget hearing of DPWH is next Monday, and I don't want to be the one that shares this data. I'm asking that before further deliberations on the DPWH budget, Secretary Dizon will do what he said he would do and share this publicly available derivable data on the budget per legislative district. But that beyond that, he also share the data on what is allocable and non-allocable in each district's budget. Because as was seen in the slide on the screen earlier, each congressman is told what projects in his district are allocable, meaning he can amend them, and what projects are non-allocable, which, again, I'm putting the spotlight on, is what DPWH has control over and should actually be subject to more scrutiny. And again, the question is, why is there lack of a transparency on sharing of this data? Perhaps because when this data is shared, along with who are the proponents for certain projects, then the public will have more leads on potential issues on those given projects. And again, it's an open secret that there is lobbying, or one can say more generously, that there are proposals for the benefit of districts by politicians. None of us, of course, will deny this because that's what each elected representative tries to do for their constituents, to try and bring in projects for their district. For some reason, though, the DPWH denies that politicians make proposals that are accepted in the NEP, even though former DPWH officials admit it, but that, at least if we can play this part of the video, the last part of the video.
Please,
The last part.
Madam Chair. Appropriations Act and the current submission for the 2026 National Expenditure Program per legislative.
In this last response, there's a denial.
According to our staff po, wala po silang alam, no, na merong ganong mga proyekto.
So again, there has been a denial that politicians submit projects into the NEP, because maybe if they admit it, then they'll have to reveal who is the proponent of these projects in the NEP. But if there's so much scrutiny on insertions in Congress, we should be even more closely examining insertions in the NEP, because doing so might be for some purpose to avoid scrutiny in Congress. And again, even members of Congress don't deny that they try and do this for their own district. As I said in my prefatory speech, it is my job to bring in projects for my district. So it's just in our interest to propose that our district be given more support by the national government. What we're asking for is transparency on the requests that were approved, and then once we see that data, then there could be more scrutiny on why those particular requests were approved. So, moving on, the question is, what is the potential motive for someone not to disclose all this data? I mentioned earlier that Secretary Dizon's NEP added many new projects. You can see that there was a reduction in the flood control budget of Secretary Bonoan to Secretary Dizon, of course, by a very big amount. But there was additions in asset preservation and also in multipurpose buildings in a total amount of around 75 billion pesos that was also raised by other members of Congress. Perhaps those were erratas of certain members of Congress, but it would also be helpful if Secretary Dizon could give a breakdown between the July NEP of Secretary Bonoan and the September NEP of Secretary Dizon. What are the changes? And if he could kindly explain the changes between the two NEPs. So, to go to the main point, as to the potential underlying undercurrent for all this. I've heard talk, including in Congress, that Secretary Dizon and his team have connections with Dpwh contractors, and that certain members of Secretary Dizon's teams are, in fact, contractors. I am not the authority on this subject, but I think that it would be good to give Secretary Dizon the opportunity to explain. Of course, everyone knows people. So to say that Secretary Dizon knows DPWH contractors is not to say that there's anything inappropriate happening. Now, if he or members of his team have some proven interest in companies with DPWH contracts, and what I heard is that it's not him who is a contractor, it's a member or members of his team who are contractors. And how exactly, I am not the authority. But I have been told that this is actually known by many in Congress now. Then the question is, if it's true that new appointees in DPWH have interests in companies that do business with DPWH, are we sure that there will be no conflict of interest in the awarding of contracts under the new leadership at DPWH? And why then has this not been previously disclosed? Secretary Dizon is very accessible to the media, and I hope then that we can ask him to disclose all of his and his team's connections to DPWH contractors, and if he thinks there are still kickbacks in DPWH, and if he has ever discussed or been offered kickbacks, and if he could share this so that we can all work together to stop the practice of giving kickbacks. Again, you can't avoid knowing people, but if these people have contracts with DPWH, and in fact will win contracts in the months and years to come in DPWH, and that there is a reported history of kickbacks being given in DPWH, then I think it deserves more public scrutiny, especially because there are plans to decrease the projects being bid in the district engineering offices and move procurement to the regional or even central office. Could it be that these reforms in DPWH will not actually reduce corruption, but will transfer the benefits of it to another level or another group of parties or contractors? And again, I don't want to say this too authoritatively, but someone actually just told me before I arrived here now that not only did one person tell me that they heard that members of the team are actually contractors, that other members of the team have already been meeting with contractors outside of DPWH at may hinihingi na daw. So maybe Secretary Dizon can also check with all of his appointees who are the contractors, if any, that they have met since their appointment and what they discussed in those meetings. It's actually quite tragic because I know that so many people have so much hope for Secretary Dizon's leadership in the DPWH, as do I. And I hope then that he can be transparent on, even if it's not from him, but any attempted offers, any opportunities that he has had to talk with contractors or for his team to, any offers for kickbacks that have been made. So, again, this is all in the context of there being a history of this also happening in DPWH. And again, multiple sources telling me and saying that this is known already by many. And I will say one more thing related to my previous advocacy to lower prices in DPWH. If Secretary Dizon will lower prices by 25%, I don't even need to ask if he has any interest in DPWH contracts, because anyone who will lower prices by 25% is showing that he is against kickbacks. So I hope that Secretary Dizon will be a hero and lower prices by 25% and show that he is against kickbacks in DPWH. My other point a while ago is that there's also more information that he can share, and I already said that earlier. And again, I hope that, number one, the past budgets per district be disclosed, and the 2026 budget per district can be disclosed, so that we can see what districts have not gotten their fair share of the budget. And again, a while ago, the video showed that Secretary Dizon said wala po silang alam na meron ganong mga proyekto na insertions of senators or other politicians. And it is an open secret that politicians do give lists. Again, I would want more projects in my district, as would any congressman, not for a personal benefit, but for the district's benefit. And I think that it would be good to be transparent then, because if I were granted my request, it would be for additional classrooms. But if there are requests before for flood control projects, and then asphalt overlay, or overpriced solar streetlights, let's just be transparent on what people have requested that has been granted in the budget. Because again, Secretary Bonoan admitted that there is a leadership fund. To add, out of the 600 billion pesos DPWH budget, there's allocable and non-allocable. And if I'm not mistaken, there's around 400 billion of allocable. So there might be close to 200 billion of non-allocable, which the district representatives might not know who is behind. So let's see what this non-allocable is. And that, again, there's even some data that I have here. There's other data that others also have. Much of this can also be pieced together from other publicly available sources, and there's really no reason for this not to be disclosed, because others anyway have it. I just hope that Secretary Dizon be the one to share it, and preferably before the Monday Senate budget hearing. And just to make another point, Congressman Toby Chanco also recently asked the Committee on Appropriations to disclose the projects submitted by congressmen to the House APRO Committee. I highly respect Congressman Chanco, and he is really the source for much of what the public knows about congressional insertions in the DPWH budget. And what I'm adding is that the insertions begin in DPWH, but to Congressman Chanco's point, every congressman has been given a baseline amount of insertions, or we now call them amendments, of 150 million pesos. This is an amendment. There's nothing irregular about it, and this is part of the job of members of Congress to identify needed projects. So there is a 150 million peso per congressman amendment into the DPWH budget. And some have been given more and some much more. And Congressman Chanco's point is that the Appropriations Committee has the list of what each member of Congress has submitted and has been granted, including of Congressman Chanco says party list representatives. So if you can see what a district representative has in his district, you can also see what a representative that it goes beyond the district has submitted. And there's certain cases where these representatives have large budgets, which are worth looking into, and in some cases where they also have ties to the contractors that end up getting awarded these projects. If I can just share the following that affects my district. Certain contractors have allegedly cornered large allocations in the DPWH budget, And if a district representative does not allow rigged biddings and does not accept kickbacks, then these budgets might be allocated to other districts. And again, if DPWH shares the data on who are all these proponents, then I hope that would help also clamp down on the potential issues in this system, and that we don't have contractors paying for budgets to be allocated to certain districts. If I could give an example, CWS party list representative Edwin Garjola is said to be able to allocate large budgets for roads of DPWH, especially in Batangas. I have information that Congressman Garjola is the proponent for road projects in my district in some way. And a company owned by his family, based on SEC corporate documents, S-Ang Construction, is the contractor for some of these projects, which can be linked to him as CWS party list representative. And another company that he is connected to, Readycon Trading, is the contractor for other projects that people, including DPWH, have told me were amendments into the budget facilitated by Congressman Garjola. He has been said by others here in Congress to me as being a big buyer of project budgets and was also very close to Secretary Bonoan. Some of these road projects in my district are, according to technical audits, substandard, and the Sangguniang Bayan of Tuy, Batangas even complained that the road that he is building was asphalt, whereas because it is a flood-prone area, it should be concrete. But the DPWH told me that Congressman Garjola was the proponent for this project and specified the program of works that this project be asphalt. I was told by other technical experts because that would make it more lucrative. And that DPWH can disclose this data so we can see the link between the proponent and the contractor. Some of these projects might no longer be under the name of the proponent, but it would be a good start to just release the available data on who is the proponent behind the projects that are alleged to have been amended into the budget by Congressman Garjola. And again, this is a current subject. One, the 2025 projects are still being implemented. And if we have found out that they were amended by a certain congressman who has also links to the contractor that DPWH awarded to, I think that would be worth someone looking into. And second, that Congressman Garjola continues to have influence over the DPWH budget as the representative of CWS party list, with many connections that pertain to the DPWH budget. Again, I would like to repeat that based on the flood control hearings, the non-allocable budget under the leadership fund that were reportedly sold should be looked into, and that it's around this time that the House General Appropriations Bill has been approved, that advance payments for projects are paid. It's very important that we get to the bottom of who is proposing these projects that have been accepted into the recently approved budget, so that we can trace, just like in the example of Congressman Garjola, if they are connected to the contractors that are eventually awarded these projects. Again, given prices have not yet been lowered on DPWH projects, one can surmise that the system of paying kickbacks continues in DPWH, and that now that the HGAB has been approved by Congress, ang bigayan ng mga kickbacks ay nagsimula na, o nagawa na, or tutuloy na. And that including those that would be paid to the DPWH officials who inserted projects into the NEP, which is why we're advocating that we revise the NEP that was submitted, because these still have projects that were inserted from the time when at least it has been testified that this practice was being done. And with prices this high, it's already been factored in. I think that there is room to give kickbacks, as I've already previously said. And at least in my district, I have asked the Committee on Appropriations to lower the price of the DPWH projects. Kung meron po akong sabihin mong 1.6 billion pesos in DPWH projects sa aking distrito, pwede akong makakuha ng sabihin niyo po 15% out of a total 25% of kickbacks. So sabihin niyo po sa 1.6 billion of DPWH budget for 1st District Batangas, there's a potential 400 million pesos in kickbacks. And dahil hindi ko kukunin yun, hiningi ko sa Committee on APRO na ibaba na lang yung mga presyo, yung 1.6 going 1.2, or actually yung road projects na 1B going 700M na lang, so that the savings can be used for other projects in my district. But again, unfortunately, my district has been affected in terms of budgetary allocation because some of these big buyers of budgets, as reported, won't put projects in my district because they know that in my district engineering office, bawal ang pagluluto ng bidding at bawal ang kickback. Kaya siguro ang incentive ay ilagay na lang sa distrito kung saan may rigging of bidding at may kickback. Pero sa akin po, meron po akong naranasan na may mga lumapit at alam ko na may mga tao, kasama ang mga nabanggit ko kanina, na may hawak na malaking pondo at kung gusto ko sana mapalaki ang budget ng aking distrito, pumayag na lang ako sana na iluto nila ang biddings sa aking distrito, ka-kickback sila, pero magkaroon naman ng project ang aking distrito. Kung sinabi naman sa mga Senate hearings, 35 to 50% of contract price goes to a project, at least nakatulong sa aking distrito. Pero ako, hindi sang-ayon sa practice na ito, pero ang unfortunate consequence is yung mga distrito kung saan walang kickback, nababawasan ng budget based on the incentives of the system. My third and last point is a policy solution. We've already proposed that prices be decreased by 25%, and I would add that budgets should be allocated based on a formula, similar to how the internal revenue allotment or national tax allotment are allocated, which is 50% population, 25% land area, and 25% equal sharing. Not only because this is equitable, but because by avoiding discretion, you avoid corruption in the practice of selling budgets. If ERA was allocated based on discretion, there could also be a temptation to sell budgets for kickbacks. But because it is automatically computed, walang nagbibigay ng SOP para sa ERA o NTA. If we can take a look at the last slide that has been prepared, simply by taking a percentage of a budget based on population, we can see that any one of us on Google can derive how much the DPWH budget of a district should be. So I'm just illustrating here how simple it is. You get the fact that the 1st District of Batangas is 0.6% of the country's population. Another district could be 0.7%, and multiply that by the DPWH budget. That at least is a starting point. But the allocation of budgets in past and in the currently proposed 2026 budget is very far from this system because there is a baseline that is not largely based on population, and then there is the discretion to allocate projects on top of that. And the point that I'm making in today's press briefing is that a lot of that non-allocable budget, of which there is available data that can be disclosed, has been reported to be given in exchange for consideration. And the consequence of this system is that yung distrito na walang kickback ay nababawasan ng budget at yung distrito na may kickback ay binibigyan ng budget. And to wrap this up with a solution for the 2026 budget, we can give an example. If we lower the budget by 25% on 600 billion, there will be 150 billion in savings. Even less, let's say 100 billion pesos in savings. And we can see that based on the populations of many districts in the country, they don't even get half of what their fair share would be. I hope that after we see how much wrong there is in the current proposed DPWH budget, there will be this reduction in prices, and that the savings can be allocated to the districts that have not gotten their fair share based on population, so that we hit two birds with one stone. We lower prices, and from what could have gone to kickbacks, we instead can fund needed projects in underserved congressional districts. On a final note, I am thankful that Secretary Dizon said in his press con last Friday that he would like to do something like this for the 2027 budget, but to avoid more contractor-sponsored projects and inequitable allocation of budget in the 2026 budget, I believe there's still time to do this for the 2026 budget. Thank you.